Theaster, this exhibition here is very biographic, self-biographic. So I wanted to ask you some personal question. In fact, I heard you last time when you were at Palais Tokyo, and it was interesting to learn from you some personal stories. So I would like first to know about what you have learned from your mom. You told a very special story when you were in Paris.
Yeah. Well, my mom, you know, she had the ability to make things work with love, you know? Like, if there was a problem, she wouldn't show frustration. She wouldn't show anxiety. She would become quiet. And she would become more loving and more trusting that the hard things would work out. She had this, you know, it's like I would say she would like go into like sixth gear, like in a car. She had a gear that was like lower to the ground, and the wheels would lock in, and then with quiet, she would just make things work that seemed like they would never work.
But there was once when you were offered something, I don't remember what, and you did not want to share with your cousin. And what was it? Could you tell us the story?
It was a video game. I could. For Christmas, I was given a video game, you know, the kind that you plug up to a TV.
Yeah.
And I already had other versions, earlier models of the video game. And my nieces wanted to play. So I didn't want my nieces to play. I wanted my friends to play and for me to play. So I told my nieces they couldn't play. And my niece told my mom, and my mom came to my room, unplugged the video game, gave the video game to my niece. And she didn't give it back to me.
Wow.
It became my niece's video game. I think I'm still upset about this.
But what did you learn from that?
Well, my mom, she knew a lot about the habits of selfish people and the challenges that grow when you are selfish. And I think at a very early age, it seemed I had more privilege than my niece. And she wanted me to understand that in our house, there was no privilege. There was nobody higher or lower. And that the more you give, the more you get. Not the more you get, the more selfish you become. And I think that lesson has stayed with me for a long time.
And in your work, you quote in a way a lot your father. So what have you learned from your father?
The reason I talk about my father is because my mom told me to talk about my father. When she was dying, she said, honor your dad. You know, honor your dad, take care of your sisters, I'll do the rest. And then, you know, she's done the rest. So it's true that I've learned many things about my dad, but I think I wouldn't have talked about him, which means I wouldn't have been here like this, unless my mom first said, forgive him, love him, honor him, you know? And this was really, I was an adult. This was in my 30s. It was very necessary for me to hear this, that I could be forgiving and loving and honorific.
And there's a work here, speaking about your father. Could you speak about it?
Yes, I have my dad's tar kettle here, the tool that we used when we were both roofing together. And he's had that tar kettle for 20 or 30 years. And then when he was getting older, he gave it to me. And I thought, what am I gonna do with this thing? You know, it's not an inheritance that has any value, you know.
So,
yeah, through my dad's demonstration of what it means to work hard, essentially. I think by being on the roof with him and working with him, seeing him leave the house at 4:30 in the morning and come home at 2:30, 3 in the afternoon, take a nap, and then do his second job, and then do it all again. Like he had a double work life in order to pay for the needs of the family and then work toward economic freedom for himself. It was like the day job covered the house, and then the night job eventually gave him freedom to be an entrepreneur. And you're talking about $12 an hour for a 50-year-old man, $15 an hour, $25 an hour into his 60s. And then that discipline then allowed him to quit his jobs and have a liberated life. I think he taught me how tools and labor and facility is the pathway to an independent life. And he was a hard worker, and he taught me to work hard.
And but in a way, if we go back to art, it's a Marcel Duchamp ready-made, personal ready-made.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think when I'm thinking about art and thinking about my place in art, I'm always thinking about Joseph Beuys and Louise Nevelson, Louise Bourgeois, Joseph and Annie Albers. I'm always thinking about Bauhaus and Black Mountain College. Mm-hmm. And I'm also thinking about Carrie James Marshall and Carrie Mae Weems and Thelma Golden. I'm thinking about, I'm thinking about Greenberg, not because I agree with his work, but I think that understanding art history and criticism is important. So I read Hal Foster, and I read Christina Sharp. That my life now is constantly acknowledging the ghosts of the past, and Marcel Duchamp is one of the most important kind of significant members of the ghosts.
But now the ghost is really a ghost because we are in a post-Marcel Duchamp era.
Yeah.
And I think the way you revisit what he did is interesting because it's kind of personal, sentimental, ready-made.
Yeah, I was gonna say that the tar kettle for me is not a ready-made. It's like a trace. It's not from a random place. It's from a very specific place, and at any point I can activate it. I can put a flame in that kettle and fix this roof, and that is very exciting. So you're right.
And symbolically, to fix a roof, what does it mean? To protect?
To protect, to have the skills that preserve. Having a good roof is not only about protection from nature, it's also about the preservation of the things under the roof. Mm-hmm. And so I think protection and preservation are both very important to me.
And what have you learned about Chicago? Chicago is very important to you, no?
Yeah. I think one of the biggest things that Chicago has given me is time away from the lights, away from the public, and fertile soil. It's an affordable city. It's been a place where I can grow and dream, and there's no one to interfere with my dream. It's been really a place of abundance for me, and I'm grateful for that. But it's also a place where, there's a recognition that people, everyday people, really matter. So I'm always thinking about like the school teachers in our city, and like the restaurant workers, and like the laborers, and the power of our labor, the power of our labor movements. Like when the Mexican community decides it's not going to work for a day, the city shuts down. And so there's a tremendous amount of respect that I have for Mexican workers in Chicago. You know, it's a city for everyday people.
And could you speak about the big project you did there?
My project in Chicago was to simply take the lack of investment by the powers that be and the buildings and the land that was available in the neighborhood where I lived, and try to use my influence and resources to make this small area, 4 square blocks, better. And over 16 years, we've been able to make a neighborhood that is now an important place for artists and creatives, a safe place for the queer community, and gathering spaces for everyday people.
And Kerry James Marshall lives in Chicago too,
Yeah,
right?
not far away from me. Yeah.
Ah,
Yeah. Kerry James, you know, there's great artists in Chicago. You know, Nick Cave is there, Dawood Bey is there, a beautiful woman, Candida Alvarez. There are just, you know, people who decided to stay.
I would dream to interview Kerry James Marshall. Help me! And what have you learned from Japan?
If you can live a singular life, if you can devote yourself to a thing, that thing will give back to you many gifts. So my life has been always doing lots of different things. Poet, writer, singer, you know. But Japan taught me that it's okay to have one kind of quiet passion and to do it with full intentionality, you know, full belief. And I think ceramics, you know, I feel like Japan gave me my hands.
Wow,
And,
it's a lot.
Yes. Yeah. This room is the result of learning so much from the philosophies that are Japanese, which means that they are also Chinese and Korean and Taiwanese. That Japan is also this kind of interesting amalgam of philosophical ideas, spiritual ideas, and I feel like I've really been fortunate to learn from it.
But where does it come from? So
I studied ceramics in Tokoname, a small city in Japan, starting about 20 years ago.
But the young guy from Chicago, how could he go to this small city?
Yeah, so my ceramics instructor from undergraduate wrote a letter for me to a Japanese ceramic homestay. And when I was in my 20s, I went to study. And I kept going back to the small town. So I knew the small town Tokoname way before I knew Tokyo and Kyoto and Osaka. I just would kind of take the train to my town, and it's been great.
And it's huge, such a difference between the American civilization and going in a small city in Japan. It was an earthquake for you, no?
It was an adjustment, but I think that the small town, Tokoname, felt more like Mississippi, where my parents are from. So it was familiar, and it was an easy adjustment. I think that my heart is a little bit more in the country than it is in the city.
Ah, that's interesting.
Yeah.
And so you have done a special sake for this installation here.
It's true. I made a sake. I made it because there were friends in this town, in Tokoname, who had a great sake factory. And I really wanted to find ways to celebrate, to bring Tokoname to the world, but also celebrate what Tokoname does well, because it's a city that not very many people know about. And I think that they have great potters and they have great sake.
And so one can have sake for free here.
Yeah, until we run out.
And sake with rice cultivated locally, right?
Yes. Yeah, you know, it's really difficult to not consider this region, which is also in Arles, a rice-growing region.
Exactly.
And I keep thinking about Tokoname and the La Camargue, and it's amazing.
La Camargue?
Yeah.
But the rice come from Japan or from Camargue?
The rice came from Japan, but I'm so curious if we could make a distilled adult beverage from the rice in this region.
Wow, that would be so cool.
Maybe I can do a little research on this.
Yes, of course. It's the next step of the project, right?
Yeah.
And what have you learned from the 2010 Whitney Biennale? What have you learned from that experience?
You know, a really wonderful person, Francesco Bonomi, was the curator that year. And I was 34 when I was invited to the Whitney. And it was the first time I was having an exhibition outside of Chicago. And Francesco, he saw my house, he saw the project that I was doing, and he said, I'm gonna give you the courtyard of the Met Breuer,
Yeah.
or now Sotheby's, the former Whitney,
Yes.
you know? And the courtyard was a big and daunting task. But it was like this guy who I talked to for 2 hours trusted me with this huge space. And I thought, let me work as hard as I can to make something very, very beautiful. And in fact, the materials that I used for the Whitney are these materials. That I created a shoe shine temple. And now this is more like a listening temple.
Today, you mean? Here?
Yes. So it's
but-
nice to have these 13 years between then and now, and to have these materials manifest again.
But this material come from where?
The neighborhood I grew up in Chicago's the West Side, Garfield Park. There was a Wrigley's chewing gum. There was a factory that made bubble gum, chewing gum, and these are the conveyor belts for this manufacturing company.
And could you speak quickly about the video outside?
Yeah. The video is called Oh the Wind. And it basically is like a salute to Japanese poetry, very simple, nature-based poetry, and gospel music. So I basically combine these two forms, and I kind of make a blues about nature.
But what is the location?
It was made at the Archie Bray Fondation, which is a former brick factory in Montana.
So far from your hometown.
Mm-hmm. But I felt the reason I wanted that film playing here is because the brick factory has the same industrial feel as this hall. And I thought if I could maybe put a former factory inside a former factory, this would be so beautiful, such a salute to the work that happened here.
And last question, what is your next dream? What do you dream about now?
I want to be a potter again.
You want to go back to Japan?
I will go back to Japan, and I will make pots.
Why? Do you listen to music in Japan?
I do.
Kind of jazz?
I now Chicago is with me in my heart, and maybe it's also with me in my albums. So I bring them with me everywhere.
But these one are yours, right?
They are mine.
So you will
I take soul, funk, gospel, jazz everywhere I go.
but it will stay here during
We'll
all
see.
these exhibitions.
Oh, of course. Of course.
Merci beaucoup.
Merci.